There is a question I get asked frequently, and it's a good question. The Psalms are from the Bible. How can you be a witch and use the Bible in your magical practice when the Bible clearly says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live"? That verse has been used to frighten people, persecute people, and justify putting people to death. And I don't believe in pretending that it doesn't exist in the Bible. Nor do I believe that we need to become defensive about it. But I also don't need Christianity's permission to practice my craft. My practice doesn't require anybody's approval. But if I'm going to call the Bible a magical textbook, and especially if I'm going to work magic with the Psalms, I think it is reasonable to ask what we're supposed to do with this passage and others like it. I think the answer is much more interesting, though, than simply arguing over whether the verse was translated properly. Because when this passage is worked magically, it does not command us to destroy practitioners of the craft. It gives practitioners of the craft a very important instruction. Stop using your magic to poison your own life. But before we can understand that, we do need to clarify what we mean by magic. In the tradition in which I was trained, magic is defined as the science of the Magi. The Magi are those who practice the craft. The Persian Magi were one historical and cultural manifestation of the craft, but they were not its origin, and they certainly were not its only manifestation. There had been Magi in every culture, regardless of the names that those cultures gave them. There have always been people who have studied the hidden laws or the occult laws of life, observed the movements of the visible and invisible worlds, read signs, cultivated sacred faculties, received divine guidance, and consciously worked with magical power. The craft is thus universal. The craft is manifested through many cultures, many symbols, many customs, and many names. The word magic comes from the Magi. These Persian Magi appear at the very beginning of the New Testament story. These practitioners studied the heavens. They recognized a sacred sign. They trusted their art enough to undertake a journey. They followed the star, and their magic successfully led them to the manifestation of divine light. That's worth noticing when you're talking about how the Bible feels about magic. The recognized religious authorities of the time knew the scriptures. When Herod asked where the Christ was expected to be born, they were able to tell him, Bethlehem. They knew where the Christ was supposed to be. But the Magi were the ones who actually found him. Their magic did not lead them away from God. It led them directly to the divine manifestation. And the Magi were not merely tolerated as colorful visitors in the story. They were instrumental to what happened next. What did they bring? They brought gold, frankincense, myrrh. We, in our culture, tend to turn those gifts into symbolic tokens in a Christmas pageant, mere oddities. But these were costly commodities. They represented substantial, portable wealth. Immediately after the visit of the Magi, Joseph is warned in a dream to take Mary and the child and flee into Egypt. The text does not explicitly say they sold the gifts to finance the journey, but the narrative arrangement is striking. Just before this family must flee suddenly into a foreign country, the Magi arrive with portable assets of great value. They received guidance in a dream warning them not to return to Herod, and they obeyed it. By refusing to report back to him, they protected the child from a murderous king. Herod had political power. The priests had scriptural knowledge, but the Magi had magic, and they were the ones who were successful. The Magi were the ones that found the child, brought material provision, obeyed the warning, and protected the child's secret. Practitioners of magic were not thus tolerated in this story. They were essential participants in its unfolding. So whatever "thou shalt not suffer a witch to live" actually means, it cannot honestly be made to mean that the Bible recognizes only one kind of magical practitioner and regards every practitioner of magic as evil. The Bible gives us a much more complicated picture. We must also understand what makes our use of the Bible magical. When I approach a psalm or any other biblical passage magically, I ask, where is this happening within me? Where is this kingdom in me? Where is this captivity, this tyrant, prophet, sanctuary, death, resurrection? Once we understand that, we can return to the verse, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." The ancient figure behind the English word witch is not necessarily equivalent to practitioners of the craft. The word has long been associated with sorcery, poison, and the malicious use of hidden powers. All true power can be misused. Medicine can heal, but it can also be used to poison. Speech can bless, but it can destroy. Religion can liberate, but religion can oppress. Political power can protect people, but political power can persecute people too. Think of all the things that can be used in more than one way. Intelligence, sexuality, imagination, money, influence, electricity. All these things can be used in constructive or destructive ways. If magical power is real, then magical power can be misused. So the ancient fear of someone using magical power poisonously gives us a clear vision of an archetype, the poisoner. So the magical question is not, who outside of me deserves to be called a witch and destroyed? The magical question is, where is the poisoner operating inside me? The poisoner is operating whenever we take our own magical faculties and direct them against our own good. What are our magical faculties? Our imagination is a magical faculty. We can use it to conceive possibilities, rehearse success, build glorious thought forms, cast marvelous spells. But we can also use it to conjure catastrophes. We can picture every way that something might go wrong. We can create vivid scenes of rejection or humiliation, illness, abandonment, failure. We can emotionally live through events that have not even occurred. That's a poisonous use of the magical faculty of imagination. Another magical faculty is faith. We can attach our faith to fear. We can become absolutely convinced that nothing ever works for us, faithful that people always leave us, or that disaster is waiting for us around the corner. And then when it happens, we say, see? Another major magical faculty is the power of will. We can use our will to sustain resentments for years, decades. Memory is a magical faculty. We can use our memory to reopen the same wound every single morning. Our intelligence is a magical faculty. We can make brilliant, carefully reasoned cases for our own worthlessness. Another important magical faculty is the power of the spoken word. We can use our words to pronounce curses over our future. What are some curses that we catch ourselves pronouncing? I'll never get out of this. Nothing ever works out for me. Nobody wants me. I always ruin everything. Why am I so stupid? We may say that we don't practice harmful magic, but we spend all day hexing ourselves. And so this verse speaks directly to the witch, to the magician. Do not suffer the poisoner to live. Do not continue giving life to the operation that is poisoning your mind, poisoning your choices, your relationships, your body, or any other part of your experience. Of course, unwanted thoughts appear. That's just the nature of the mind. Minds produce thoughts. That's what they do. It doesn't mean that you failed because you notice a fear or a resentment or envy or other poison. The fact that you noticed these things means that you're already ahead of the operation. Noticing them doesn't mean becoming violent toward yourself. We're not creating an internal persecution against ourselves. We're not discovering something unpleasant within ourselves and then attacking ourselves for having it. That would just be another manifestation of the poisoner. The instruction here is not to punish yourself. It's to withdraw your authorization from the poisonous operation. The first step is to recognize it. Notice when it's happening. My imagination's being used against me. I'm imagining a grievance. I'm putting my faith in the worst possible outcome. I'm building a case against myself. In other words, I'm hexing myself. I'm cursing myself. The next step is to name the operation. Those of you who have seen me give a tarot reading notice that I talk about this with the Queen of Swords. When the Queen of Swords part of the mind starts to do her thing, I just say, Queen of Swords. I call her by name. Naming the operation is essential because it interrupts our identification with it. Think of the story of Rumpelstiltskin. The woman was under Rumpelstiltskin's power until she knew Rumpelstiltskin's name. And as soon as she said, Rumpelstiltskin, the spell was broken. And the same thing goes with the Queen of Swords or whatever you want to call the poisoner. When you see the poisoner, you call it by name, it loses its power over you. The third step is to not suffer it to live. And that simply means don't feed it. Don't rehearse it. Don't defend it. Don't keep explaining why it's correct. Don't obey it. Don't engage with it. A thought can knock on your door without ever being invited to move into your house. You don't have to fight it. You don't have to debate it. You simply stop supplying it with the life force that it needs to continue. It's a parasite. It doesn't have its own life force. It's living off of you. And that brings us to the fourth step. And that is to return to the sanctuary. You don't just stop the thought and then that's the end of it. Our faculties must be returned to their proper source and purpose. Psalm 73 gives a beautiful example. The psalmist has become poisoned by appearances. He looks at the people who seem cruel and dishonest, and yet they appear to prosper, and he becomes consumed by bitterness and resentment. He tries to reason his way through it, but he can't. When I thought to know this, it was too painful for me until I went into the sanctuary of God. So he returns to the sanctuary, and in the sanctuary, what happens? His perception changes. He doesn't wait for the external circumstances to change before he enters the sanctuary. Because once he enters the sanctuary, he's no longer looking at them through the eyes of the poison. He remembers, thou shalt guide me with thy counsel. That's the completion of the operation. Recognize the poisoner, name the operation, stop feeding it, and then return to the sanctuary. Our magical faculties do not need to be destroyed. They need to be released from poisonous employment. They need to be restored. The Bible gives us another remarkable picture of the difference between a practitioner of the craft and a poisoner. And this is in the story of the witch of Endor. Saul has outlawed practitioners like her. He's driven them from the land and placed their lives in danger. Then Saul finds himself in trouble. God's no longer answering him through dreams or prophets or any of the accepted methods of divination. So rather than repairing his relationship with God, what does Saul do? Calls up a witch because he wants the witch to call up the dead Samuel. So he disguises himself and he goes off to her. And what does she do? She objects. She reminds this stranger that Saul has expelled practitioners from the land, and she fears that this request may be a trap designed to get her killed. Saul, who is the king responsible for the prohibition, assures her that she will not be punished for doing exactly what he asks her to do. So she didn't seduce Saul into some forbidden practices. Saul conscripts her into doing an operation for him. And her work is successful. She knows what she's doing. Samuel does appear. So unfortunately for Saul, Samuel does not give him a clever way out of his situation. He confirms the judgment Saul was already trying to escape. The kingdom is going to David. Israel will lose the battle. Saul and his sons will die. In other words, Saul goes to the witch because God won't answer him, and the witch brings him the news that he is toast. Her magic worked perfectly. It's Saul's plan that didn't work so well. So when Saul collapses on the floor, she doesn't gloat over him. She doesn't curse him. She doesn't repay his persecution with cruelty. She feeds him. She kills the fatted calf, prepares bread. She persuades him to eat so that he will have enough strength to leave. Eat and go. So this witch is competent, truthful, reluctant, and compassionate. It's Saul who is frightened, hypocritical, tyrannical, and entitled. So the poisoner in this story is Saul, not the witch. Saul shows us what happens when the poisoner is continually permitted to live. God didn't tell Saul to be mean. God didn't tell Saul to persecute David, or to hurl a spear at Jonathan, or to slaughter the priests of Nob, or to endanger the witch of Endor. Saul bought all of that up all by himself. Fear, jealousy, pride, resentment, violence. He repeatedly gave all these poisons his attention and his obedience. Saul took God for granted. A witch didn't make him do that. Saul assumed that divine guidance would always be there whenever he happened to want it, even though he repeatedly refused to listen to it when it came. He wanted guidance without communication. He wanted an answer without reconciliation. He wanted God to tell him how to preserve a life he had constructed under the direction of fear. But magic isn't there to force the divine to endorse error. Remember, the Magi followed the star. Saul is the one that followed his fear. The Magi honored the guidance they received. They acted on it, invested themselves in it, brought their gifts, listened to their prophecies, protected the secret, changed their route when they were warned. Saul, on the other hand, repeatedly disregarded guidance, always desperately demanded one more answer when the consequences arrived. The Psalms teach us how not to become Saul. They teach us to return to the sanctuary so that fear doesn't build an entire kingdom. The Psalms teach us to seek divine counsel, recover our true perception, to release resentment, to praise what is good, to trust in divine law, and to return our magical faculties to their proper employment. The Psalms thus teach us how to become, quote, good witches, not by making us behave according to some sort of religious law, but by returning us to the goodness of who we are. In The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy does not defeat the Wicked Witch through superior occult knowledge. She doesn't devise an elaborate counterspell. She doesn't have any idea she can destroy the witch. She's not more aggressive than the witch. She's actually quite timid in her presence. But her friend the Scarecrow is on fire. She sees that he's in danger, so what does she do? Grabs a bucket of water and throws it on him to save him. The water strikes the witch, and then the witch begins to melt. Dorothy's goodness is not a performance. She's not trying to prove that she's a good person, nor is she trying to kill the witch. She's simply being a good friend. She sees someone she loves in danger, and compassion becomes her natural response. Dorothy never knew how to defeat the witch. Nobody did. All those years, they were under this oppression by this poisonous presence, and all they had to do is splash her with some water? But that's a beautiful image of what happens when we return to the sanctuary. We don't overcome our poisoners by becoming more poisonous toward ourselves. We don't defeat cruelty within ourselves with more cruelty. We don't defeat fear by becoming afraid of fear. We return to who we are. We restore our faculties to their factory settings, if you will. We allow the goodness of who we are at our core to become alive and active and no longer imprisoned by the poisoners. And that goodness has powers that we haven't even started discovering. We haven't even scratched the surface of how powerful we are. A poisonous operation may seem enormous. It may have intimidated us for years. It may have convinced us that it's invincible. But remember, longevity is not proof of power. The thing that dissolves it is usually sitting around in an ordinary bucket. So how can a witch work magic using the Bible when the Bible itself says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live"? By understanding what magic is. Magic is the science of the Magi. The Persian Magi were just one manifestation of a universal craft. Their magic led them to the divine light, and your magic will lead you to your divine light. The poisonous figure in this difficult verse is not synonymous with practitioners of the craft. It represents malicious and poisonous employment of power. And when we work this passage magically, when we ask where this figure exists within our consciousness, the verse becomes direct and useful as an instruction. It teaches witches how to become more powerful witches. Do not allow the poisonous operation to continue living through you. Do not use imagination to terrify yourself, or place your faith in fear, or use your will to perpetuate resentment, or use your memory to reopen every injury, or use your intelligence to persecute yourself, or use your speech to curse your own future. So if you want to become an effective witch, stop hexing yourself. Recognize the poisoner. Call it by name. Stop feeding it, and then return to the sanctuary. Receive the guidance that is your divine right. And remember who you are. Remember what you are. You're not a poisoner. You may have become victimized by an inner poisoner, but that's not who you are. I don't work psalms despite practicing magic. I work psalms because they teach me how to return to my magic, to receive divine guidance. So the next time you catch the poisoner operating in your mind, don't be frightened. Don't attack yourself for finding it there. Simply say, "I see this." Call the operation by name. Withdraw your authorization. Return to the sanctuary. And let that inner poisoner dissolve back into the native nothingness from whence it came. Not because you have become more powerful at fighting, but because you've remembered who you are. And who you are can't suffer a poisoner to live. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I so appreciate you. Until next time, blessed be.